Monsieur le Président, cher Goodluck, je tenais à être présent pour cet événement. Je salue à cette occasion
wish to welcome
l'ensemble des chefs d'État
all of the heads of states and ministers who represent the African continent and indeed well beyond. I would like to welcome President Barroso, who represents the links between our two continents. 100 years for an individual, this is usually the end of the journey. For a nation, 100 years is still very young, but it provides history and it enables conclusions to be drawn from history. This history, your history, the history of Nigeria, the amalgamation of two protectorates at the beginning of the 20th century, which enabled the founding of Nigeria, followed by your independence. The history is the history of your struggle for unity through hardship, sometimes major hardship, and I'm thinking in particular of the Biafra War. But history also tells us that federalism, the ban on ethnic parties, policies for reconciliation are the best response every time the danger, the threat of separatism emerges. And you have proved this. Today, Nigeria is confronted with terrorism from Boko Haram. This terrorism is no different from the others. It uses the same weapons and it always strikes the civilian population. I'm thinking of what happened a few days ago after a school was targeted, children were murdered, villages were looted, and I'm thinking also of hostages who have been taken by this group. So I assure you, President, that your struggle is also our struggle, and we will always stand ready to provide not only our political support, but our support and help every time you need it, because the struggle against terrorism is also the struggle for democracy. Since 1999, Nigeria has decided to establish strong democratic institutions, to establish the rule of law, to improve the situation for minorities, and to enable the struggle against inequality to go ahead. Democracy is also the best way of ensuring stability and economic development. And this is what you have displayed in recent years. Nigeria has become a major economy, perhaps Africa's leading economy, with strong growth, a high standard of living, and the emergence of Nigeria, everybody can testify to this, is an opportunity for the whole of the African continent. France has established with Nigeria and other countries which are represented here an economic relationship in order to rise to the challenges of access to electricity, to drinking water, to process waste, to provide a transport system, to train youth. And this is why we pay the greatest attention to establishing new ties for development between France, Europe and Africa. The time of submission, domination, of markets that are shared, all this is behind us. You have wanted there to be global competition, and France must respond, and Europe must respond to this challenge. You also, on the occasion of today's centenary celebration of Nigeria, you also wanted this meeting to cover the theme of security. I fully share this goal. The African continent is threatened by trafficking, drugs, arms, and also human trafficking. It is also hit by terrorism, as I've just spoken about. Europe is not protected from this. Anything that happens in Africa can have direct consequences in Europe, and this is the reason why France has taken on its responsibilities, and also we have stood by the people of Mali at a tragic time in order to give them the necessary support in order to enable them to retrieve their territory and to restore democracy. I decided, after this intervention, to restructure the French military operations in Africa with fewer static forces in the military bases and far greater mobility and cooperation with the African armies, because the Africans themselves must ensure their own security. I have therefore committed that France will train every year 20,000 African soldiers. I wish to act with the African Union, which is represented here, and I wish to commend it, and all the regional organizations, and in particular, I'm here in Abuja with ECOWAS. ECOWAS has done a great deal for the regional integration of Western Africa and was present when the deployment of forces in Mali was required, and I would like to thank ECOWAS on this occasion. We're also facing the threat of piracy, in particular in the Gulf of Guinea. It is a scourge, and Nigeria is hit along with other neighboring countries. You're all the more concerned because you have oil wealth, and piracy does not attack the poor. It attacks those who can distribute or transport wealth. This is why we have jointly established a program to counter piracy, and you have taken the initiative through the Yaoundé Declaration last June. France will support your action. Similarly, regarding trafficking, we approve the stance of countries that have established and ratified the treaty on the arms trade. Nigeria was a driving force behind the treaty. It's a major step forward in the international arena, and France will approve this treaty and will submit the instruments of ratification at the end of March at the United Nations. And finally, we have to combat all forms of inter-faith struggle, because this is another scourge that threatens us through the chaos that some countries may experience. And this is when struggles emerge which use the pretext of religion or use fanaticism or fear to pit men and women against each other, whereas in fact they should be part of the national union. And this is why we are in the Central African Republic, and this is why France, standing by the African states, and there are many of them, France has decided, along with the African states, to be present. We could have stood aside. We could have decided that there was no room for a French presence. History has shown that we were perhaps too present on this continent, but no, there was a humanitarian risk, the risk of a humanitarian disaster, which has emerged already through thousands of deaths, and therefore we responded to the call of the United Nations, the resolution of the Security Council, and with our African friends, we have managed to step in to separate the warring parties. Much remains to be done. The Secretary General of the United Nations has asked for reinforcements. We endorse the proposal. The Africans also, and there will soon be 6,000 African soldiers, and tomorrow, very soon, a UN peacekeeping force will take over. But what we're doing in Central Africa is also a lesson to enable a country to restore its territorial integrity, even though there are risks involved, but also to restore the authority of the state, because without this, there cannot be a national community living in peace. This is a lesson that we are giving for the whole of Central Africa, which may well be threatened by these inter-religious struggles. I would like to thank the European Union, the African Union, for what they are doing, because security is crucial for development. Africa has a great future. It is the continent of the future. This is where the major infrastructures will be built, that new sources of energy will be deployed. This is where the new requirements of the world will be defined. This is a continent full of promise, but which may be hindered by instability and the lack of security. We should also provide our full support for development, and France and Europe must help in this. 80% of French overseas development aid goes to Africa, and we will continue. We have decided to double the funding for Africa. Those who are from the French Development Agency, the funds from this agency for the next 5 years, because we feel that these projects will be good for Africa and good for Europe, good for growth around the world. President, ladies and gentlemen, presidents, heads of state and government, this is what I've come to tell you on behalf of France. We have responsibilities to shoulder together, responsibility for security, responsibility for development, responsibility for the global economy. We also have other responsibilities that lie ahead, and namely the responsibility for the climate. France next year will host the climate conference that should lead to a global agreement to enable us to put an end to climate change. I know I can count on Africa in this, because Africa also is threatened by pollution, by desertification, by flooding. So, together, France, Europe, and Africa, we should also prepare a wonderful centenary anniversary together. We know what happened in history. We know what has happened to unite and separate us. This, in the next century, nothing will separate us, and we will stand united to rise to the world's challenges. Thank you very much.